Ramluckan here from the Department of Criminology and Forensic Studies. Of course, I want to start by saying I think that the presentations were all really informative. I totally agree with all the speakers that an interdisciplinary approach is what's absolutely required, and moving away from the silo mentality is probably the only answer in resolving what is going to become a social problem, really. So seeing more of that happen, I think, is very encouraging and gives us the confidence that South Africa is moving in the right direction. The one that I have for, I think it's Susan, we did a small-scale study. The idea was to have 1,000 respondents, but of course, anything that's cyber-related, people get very nervous about it. And I think that's a reality we should consider as well. Perhaps we've come to a stage where there's so much of panic around it that we're even afraid to participate in research that would give us results that can shift the discourse as well. But what was interesting is that one of the questions we asked was, what were the high-hanging threats in terms of cybersecurity, and the population eventually was only about 439. But 40 point something percent of them said it was online banking that poses a great risk. And I think those are some of the research results that we must interrogate further and take it into the qualitative discourse and look at what narratives are actually emerging. Yeah, so that's my comment, really.
I can respond to say that most certainly the banking industry is forever being confronted with concerns around that particular product and infrastructure. So what you're saying is not, it doesn't come as a surprise. The reality, however, is that the current modus operandi are focused and targeted at the consumer rather than the bank, which is very, very unfortunate, because not every consumer has the right level of information at hand to protect themselves. They also don't always understand the risk associated with using a mobile device. People think of their phones as a communication tool. They don't think of it as a mini computer. So it's a very complex environment, and that's why the banking industry is really investing very heavily in education. I'm not saying we are in fact reaching everybody, but we most certainly are trying. In fact, today, SABRIC is releasing crime stats, and you'll also notice when you see those in the media later today that we speak about phishing and vishing and all of those social engineering tactics that criminals are using and aiming at the consumer to get their hands on the consumer's money.
Any other questions?
Okay, my name is Iso Choma from Telkom. My question is based to the academic presentation. So I actually believed in your presentation before I listened to your presentation. The issues of skills is a big one, and when I see your slide summarizing what all our national universities are doing around cybersecurity, it got me worried. So the fact is we're struggling for a very small pool of resources in the cybersecurity space. Actually, the gentleman from Dubai, some of the best skills are getting recruited for big monies and they cross over to Dubai and all that. So my question is simply, what are we doing to change that? Because I strongly believe that that's where we need to start, and not even at the postgraduate level, but as low as possible, start to build those cybersecurity skills. So what are we doing either nationally or as academic institutions to change this status quo?
So the question was for Brett, and I think after Susan may have a couple of comments as well on some of the things she's doing.
Yeah, I think the answer will be combined between the two of us. From the industry side, SABRIC is taking the lead there. CSIRs and Cybersecurity Hub is supporting very strongly, so that there is an industry push towards that. And then also there are a few other initiatives coming out of that, because once you professionalize cybersecurity, you will start seeing that there's possible very distinct job functions that we can now start tailoring education towards. And Prof. Furens, the row in front of you, has been working with that, as well as at a BRICS level, looking at collaboration with other countries to bring in degrees where we can have international experience coming into South Africa as well. One of the challenges, obviously, universities are very quickly criticized to not produce experts in cybersecurity, but the problem is, if we don't necessarily have sufficient experts in the first place, who's going to pass on the knowledge? And I think that's one of the challenges that we do have. And there still is also not quite the distinction between what you'd find in maybe a theoretical degree versus the actual skills. Industry wants skills. And what you're seeing is the professional bodies, the nature of their certifications are moving more towards practical skills away from then just sitting a theory exam. So the CISM, I was one of the CISM ones, that was a purely theory exam that we wrote. Now all the certifications that ISACA, CompTune, I think there's, and the SANS ones, there are a lot of practical elements to it. So you can certify in the theoretical aspect as well as the practical implementation of that theory. So that will develop the skills going forward. So what I've been doing in my courses, just as an example, and other universities are doing that. The South African Research Network and Sanron and Tennant have a hacking challenge. So we actually introduce our students into this competition. So the university will just have their own the module usually, with the groups in the module competing against each other. This year I took it a step further because I did both engineering and computer science, and I had the two different disciplines challenge each other and to develop the skills to see who could win. And then those teams now can go to the national competition where the universities compete, and then they'll go to the international competition, whoever wins that. So we are trying to build the skills through those types of initiatives. So it's not only a purely theory-based one anymore. I think that is one of the traps we fall into, being cybersecurity, you being more of an introductory sometimes in the modules, you just fall back onto what is in the textbook. And you don't really necessarily bring what industry wants to see into some of those modules. So those of us who have moved from CSIR and industry back into academia are now trying to use our experience to upgrade those modules to make sure industry is actually getting the skills they require.
Susanna, perhaps something
Right.
around-
Just from the banking industry perspective, obviously skills development, I've already mentioned it, and retention of skills is top of mind issues. Here, as I said earlier on, we're working with our CETA to recognize cybersecurity practitioners as professionals and to have career paths for them. In that context, we're busy at the moment with the process of registering OFO codes, and of course we had to first develop a skills framework to get there, because we needed to know what the skills pockets are. Something that I think is worth mentioning as well is that if you talk about cybersecurity skills, that's literally an umbrella term, because within cybersecurity there's so many areas of specialization. And something that two initiatives that I want to put out there that the banks have done recently is, one is we've tried to bring courses that were previously only accessible if you were to go abroad to actually do those courses. We've collaborated with each other to get critical mass to actually bring them to South Africa, so that the employer doesn't have to pay the cost of actually sending the candidate across to another jurisdiction. That was the one initiative. And then something else that is working well for us, we've also got an initiative that aims at cross-skilling and transferring skills. So every second week at SABRIC, the cybersecurity professionals who are part of this community can actually co-locate. So it literally means that they sit in one room doing their own jobs, but next to each other, and they can ask each other questions and they can solve problems together. And that's been quite effective as well. It's, you know, so the cross-skilling as well. There's so many levels to this. It's actually a conversation that can take a whole conference, really.
So I think one of the things I'd like to point out is that there's a lot of talk about this endemic skills shortage, but I think some empirical evidence is needed to see exactly what roles are required, right? And we want to, as part of that project that Susan's doing, is we want to do this empirical research to understand, because we don't want to be the people that promotes a threat intelligence hunter, whatever, and those newly trained professionals don't get absorbed. So the issue of absorption is very important when it comes to any kinds of skills initiative, and that's one of the things we're trying to pull together, just to give it some kind of credibility, the actual professionalization. Jackie?
I don't know what Joey is going to talk about when she speaks, but I think knowing from, you know, the work that we have been doing jointly with her before she joined the Tshwane University of Technology, there has been a very aggressive national program to try and address the skill sets. I think in Brad's presentation, he has given, you know, just a snapshot of what the various institutions are trying. But the bottom line is, at this stage, South Africa does not produce, it doesn't have qualifications specific to the cyber domain. We have, you know, software developers, engineers, and so on and so on. But we actually do not have yet a formal qualification coming out of our universities, other than basically the short courses here and there. Maybe institutions have just started. Maybe there is a program that there is a formal qualification that is there. But if it is there, you know, it's just a few that have just started over the past year or so. So actually that question that he is asking is very valid. As a country, we really need to get our hands on the deck.
Just before I take that question, I just want to bring Andrew into the conversation. Just maybe Andrew's very much at the coal face. If you can just tell us the kinds of threats you are seeing emerging, and what kind of balance that against the kind of skills you think we need to start building.
Yeah, so I think we'll be here for the rest of the day if I had to list alphabetically what kind of threats we're seeing. But it's very much user focused. So what I mean by that, it's people focused. So I can't really speak for the financial industry, but for the rest of the industries that we do work with, it's the people on the ground that are being exploited left, right, and center, to be honest. And that's through a number of different ways. I mean, phishing, vishing, two specific ways, to the point where we've seen artificial intelligence, or you want to call it artificial intelligence, being used for vishing programs. And that kind of stuff you can go buy on the dark web right now. You can subscribe to it, and we spoke about a couple of weeks ago, you even get a service level agreement behind these kind of things that promote the fact that these things work. Or money back guarantee. So over and above that, it's the more advanced types of threats, and that's not necessarily a nation state threat. It's a lot of cybercrime as well. Advanced cybercrime with guys with deep pockets that have the time to invest in exploits, developing new attack vectors, and using the general populace to actually test those attack vectors and the types of successes that they're seeing. So they would then go on to use those exploited users or user bases or companies, organizations, whatever you want to call them, to further their attack methods and further their means for international attacks and laterally spreading internationally or globally. And what I mean by that is, so we've seen in South Africa and Africa as a whole that we're a hotbed for attacks. And because we're such a hotbed, because of the lack of skills and the lack of acknowledgement that these attacks are happening on a daily basis, they're using us as springboards and basically using our resources that we pay dearly for to attack other countries. So we're seeing varying threats, but it does boil down to the skill shortage. It does boil down to the user and the people on the ground actually as well.
So we currently at lunch. I'm going to take two more questions, Joey and the gentleman there, and I think we're going to have to break for lunch at that point. Yeah. If you can take both questions and then we can take going.
I'll just be very short, Kiru. Just on the comments of what Jackie and Brett talked about, it is true that we worked for a long time to get full-blown qualifications. Lucky for us at TUT, from next year, we will have a national diploma in cybersecurity, in IT cybersecurity, advanced diploma in IT cybersecurity, as well as a postgraduate diploma in cybersecurity. We're also busy now working together, like Brett said, with the BRICS countries to have a master's degree that is a subject master's degree with all the cybersecurity modules in. And further, we're busy now on the BRICS level. That means for students, there's the first international competition between students between the BRICS countries will also take place in September. We did local competitions now, and there's now a after the local competitions in December, there will now be a second round of competitions, and the best 2 teams will go to Russia to compete.
Great, thank you. My name is Yaron Asabi. I'm the founder of Digital Solutions Group, and we recently started a cybersecurity business called Digital Resilience. We're investing heavily in training, and coming from the BPO customer experience space, we created 300 jobs in BPO last year, and we want to do something very similar in cybersecurity. I think that there's a lot of great technology available around machine learning, artificial intelligence. You mentioned the bank CETA in your talk, and how you're trying to, get the bank CETA to kind of maybe get skills development levy or NQF aligned courses. I'm interested. We actually, Jackie and I discussed this over dinner about a few weeks ago. I'm interested to learn what government is doing around NQF aligned courses. How do we allow corporates to tap into their skills development levy? Are there any initiatives? How do we do public-private partnerships? We've made a huge investment. We're planning to train 200 people on SOC analyst level all the way to level 2, 3 architects. So I'd be very interested to learn more about what's available.
Does anybody want to take that? I could try. So the training that the project that Susan's talking about is how we massify this training, and that's via the CETAs, the Sector Education Training Authorities. However, CETAs require certain artifacts like organizing frameworks for occupations, all for codes. And until those codes are registered, and then the actual curriculum can be built. So right now, we're in the phase of being able to register a couple of those codes, and then the private sector comes on board and creates those curriculum, and that's where you get your skills development levy from. So certainly the role for the CETAs is where we see the massification of the cyber skills training. But we can talk more offline, and I can give you more detail on how you get involved in that. And certainly the OFL codes needs to be socialized amongst all of the CETAs and with the industry to get buy-in, and then we go onto the registration process. So there is that process that we need to follow. And we're hoping to get it done at least, I reckon, by the end of this year. Okay, so we at lunch. I'm going to give Dr. Ramluckan a chance to conclude, and then we'll take lunch. Yeah? Is that okay?
Okay. Just a basic thing is that looking at it from an academic point of view, and I think collaboration, we have to go through that inter-trans multidisciplinary thing before we can actually decide, because at the moment the Department of Higher Education, Science and Technology is pushing for qualifications in cybersecurity. So we are on board. We're just hoping for the mandate to come through. Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. Just give the panel a round of applause.